Hello everyone, my name is Finding Pepper and welcome to episode 3 of the Dungeon Crawler tutorial series. The past 2 episodes we created a room editor as well as a player with working collision. This episode we're going to be expanding beyond the single room and creating scripts such that our player can move off screen into another room. We don't have any extra costumes we need for this episode, so there's no need to go to the assets project. So I want the rooms to be arranged on a grid so that each room has an X and a Y value, and when you move off the right of the screen you go into the room with an X1 greater. If you go off to the left, the X will decrease, etc. So I'm going to create variables room X, room Y, and room number for all sprites. And I'm using the hash symbol. I'll also create a list called rooms for all sprites. Now this rooms list will be formatted X, Y, room number. And then there will be another list, which I'll make right now, called room store. And this list will contain the room code for each room number. Now, what is a room code? A room code is a way of encoding the tiles in a room that can easily be stored in a list. I'm going to delete everything in the lists. And let's create a new sprite called save. First, I'll create a block to create the room code. I'll call it save room with an input room number. Run without screen refresh. Then I'll create a new variable for the sprite only, room code. And another one, index, for the sprite only. So I'm going to start with a blank room code. So set room code to the empty value. And we will build up the room code from this by using the join block to join room code and then some other value. I'll set our index to 1, and this represents the index that we are at in the grid list, because we're going to start at index 1 at the grid list and then move down. Repeat length of grid, and each time we will change our index by 1. So this allows us to see each item in the grid starting with index 1 and then index 2 and then index 3 and so on. Each time we'll set room code to join room code and then another join underscore item index of grid. Let's try saving room 1. Now you'll notice that we haven't actually used the room number input to this yet, so it doesn't matter what we put in here. So I'm going to click save room, then I'll show the room code variable, and you can see right here we have a very long string of 22s, and then it turns into 7s further on. We want to be able to save this room code in a list, the room store list, and that's what the room number input is for, to determine what index in the room store list this should be saved at. So we can replace item room number of room store with room code. However, what if that item doesn't exist yet? For example, if we have an empty list and we try to save room number 2, there's no 2 in the list. So we need to repeat until room number is not greater than the length of room store. And we will add empty value to room store. Great. Now if we save room 1, we should see something appear in the room store list. If we click on it, we can see that it is quite long, and it contains a lot of repeated numbers. Let's also just save room 3 to test that that works, and it adds empty value in the middle. I'll delete those 2 for now. So about the repeated numbers. We can make this room code a lot shorter if we compress all the repeated numbers into one number, or rather 2. we're going to store it by the tile and then the amount of times that that tile appears in succession. So at the beginning here, we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 15, 16, 17. We have 17 22s, so we would encode it 22 underscore 17. So we'll make a new variable amount for the sprite only, and a new variable tile for the sprite only. To start, we'll set amount to 0, and we'll set tile to item 1 of grid. Then each time we loop, we will change amount by 1. Now, and we want to check if the tile is different than our tile variable. And if it is, then we will change the tile and we'll set amount back to 0 and we'll add some stuff to the room code. So, if not, item tile index of grid equals tile. Then we'll set room code to join room code, and then we'll get a couple join blocks here. Join room code tile underscore amount underscore. Then we'll set amount back to 0 because we have a new tile, and we'll set our tile to item tile index of grid. Now at the end we still have one tile amount combination that hasn't been added, so we'll need another set room code block. Now let's try saving room 1. Now, look at the room code. We see we have 2217, 714, 22.2, etc. And this, turns out, is a much shorter way of storing our rooms. It's still a bit long and could be optimized further, but I think this is good enough for our purposes because our rooms are all fairly small. Okay, now we have our save room scripts. We need a way to load our room. So make a new block called load room with an input room number. Run without a screen refresh. Now at the beginning, we'll set room code to item room number of room store. So rather than building our code, we are reading from our code. We're also going to delete all of the grid list because we are starting fresh. Now this time we will use the index variable to represent the letter that we are at the room code. So we'll start by setting index to 1. We'll repeat until letter index of room code equals the empty value. If it is equal to the empty value, that means we've gotten to the end of the room code. Because, say, letter 1 of apple is A, but letter 200 of apple is the empty value. Now, how do we get the tile amount combination? Well, we'll make a new block called read next value. Run without screen refresh. Now, we'll start with the tile. We'll set tile to blank, and then we keep reading until we hit an underscore. So repeat until letter index of room code equals underscore. Then we'll set tile to join tile and then the letter index of room code. And then we'll change our index by 1. Now, when we get to the end, it's an underscore, so to read the next value, we need to change the index by 1 again. Now we'll do the same for the amount. Set amount to blank, and then amount. Essentially just replace all the tiles with amount. Great. We can use the read next value in the load room custom block. And then once we have our tile and amount, we can simply repeat amount, add tile to grid. Great. Shall we test this? I'm going to hide my room star list, and this should all be saved. So in the tiles, I'm going to use my generate blank room block, run it, and we have a blank room. Now I'm going to load room 1. And now we have our room back here. This is great. Okay, let's create some messages to trigger these things. When I receive new message, load room. And when I receive a new message, save room. And we'll put the room number variable into this slot. Alright, I'm going to go into tiles. When we switch out of the editor, I'd like to save the room. So broadcast, save room. When we switch into the editor, we'll broadcast load room. Now I'm going to put these before we set our editor variables. In the main sprite, I'll start by setting room X and room Y to 0. And room number to 1. And while I'm here, I'll also just set editor to 0 when we start the game. I forgot to do that last episode. Okay, now let's show room store list. I'll make it small and put it down at the bottom. Now I'm going to enter the editor and make some changes to our room. I'll actually move the room store list up to the top. So I'm going to just put some things down here, and when we exit the editor, we should see our room store list change. See, there we go. And when we enter the editor, I'm going to replace this wall and go back, and it is back to normal. Okay. We need to modify the load room script, because this is not actually correct. Because if we're changing a room, we need to first find the room number based on the room X and room Y variables. So I'm going to hide the room store list and manually add 001 to the rooms list. This is X of 0, Y of 0, and room number of 1, as in it corresponds to number 1 in the room store list. Let's search the rooms list. Now this might take some time, as in not be completely instantaneous, so I'll create a new message called stop main loop, and this will just briefly pause the game so nothing bad can happen while we are loading the room. So when I receive, we're in the main sprite, when I receive stop main loop, we're just going to stop other scripts in sprite. So I'm going to loop through the room list and see if the room X and room Y match our current room. And if they are, then we're going to set the room number to the number that comes after that X and a Y in the rooms list. So we'll use the index variable, start by setting index to 1, and then we repeat length of rooms, and we have to divide it by 3 because there are 3 items per room. And each time we change index not by 1 but by 3. We want to make sure that item index of rooms is equal to room X, and item index plus 1 of rooms, that is the second value for that room, is equal to room Y. Put the index at the end. If it is, then we found our room, so we set room number to item index plus 2 of rooms. Then we will load room number. Remember, we stopped our main loop, so we need to remember to broadcast start main loop. I'll put a wait on the broadcast stop main loop, just to make sure everything's fully stopped before we begin. And I'll also create a new message called done loading room. I'm not going to use this right away, but it's just good to have in case we need to trigger something off of when we're done loading a room. I'm also going to stop the script once we find a room. Now, what happens if we don't find a room? What should we do then? Well, we need to create a new room in our rooms list. So, I'll add room X to room store, to rooms, sorry, room X to rooms, room Y to rooms, and then what do we do about the number? That is the question. And what room do we even put there? Well, I'm going to create a default room. I'll enter the editor, and just as you saw, our load scripts did work when we entered the editor. So I'm just going to create empty room. I'm going to add 4 doorways. Now, I did erase my old room, however, it is still saved in the room store list. So rather than exiting the editor, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to save room to an unused spot in the room store list, so 2. Now I'm going to make a variable called default room to hold this default room code. So I'm going to set default room to item 2 of room store. Now that default room is held in a variable, so we can just delete it from the room store list. Now we haven't exited the editor yet, so if we click load room 1, run the project, we should have our old room back again. Back to the problem of creating a new room. I'm going to add our default room to our room store list, and then we can modify it as we like. And then I'll set the room number to the length of room store, and this is just setting the room number to the last added item in the list. And then we will simply add room number to rooms. Then we broadcast our done loading room and start main loop. We'll also need to load room number. Okay, we are going to use our load room broadcast when we start the game. So rather than broadcasting start main loop, I'll broadcast load room. The reason I'm doing this instead is because, if you remember, the broadcast load room, the when I receive load room, will broadcast start main loop. Okay, when we run this, everything should be the same. Let's go into the editor and make some changes to our level. Just graffiti over it. Now when we start the game, it should all be gone because it should reload the room as it was. Okay, gonna hide the room store list. Let's write code for the player walking off screen into a new room. I'll create a new custom block called change room, run without screen refresh, and I'll drop it under move player with the other blocks we have here. We'll check if the player is off the right or left of the screen, or top or bottom. If X position is greater than 240, then let's also just just to make sure our speed X is greater than 0.1, meaning we are moving right. Then we will change room X by 1, broadcast load room, and then set X to 0 minus X. So we are going to the opposite side of the screen. This is why I have the speed X greater than 0.1, so that we don't automatically go back through the room transition immediately after we go through it. We have to actually be moving in the direction of the room transition. We'll also check for X position less than negative 240, and here we want to speed X less than negative 0.1, and we'll change room X by negative 1, and we'll keep the set X the same as it is. Then for Y position, if Y position is greater than 240, we just change all the X's to Y's, set Y to 0 minus Y position, and we need to change the 240 to a 180 because the screen is 180 pixels tall. Actually, it's 360 pixels tall. If Y position is less than negative 180 and speed Y is less than negative 0.1, then we'll change room Y by negative 1. Keep that the same. Okay, great. Here's our change room block. Let's try creating a hole in the wall. Open the editor. Then I'm going to close the editor. Make sure to close the editor. And And then I'm going to walk off the screen. And aha! You see, can't go off. Now this is because we're colliding with the wall on the left side of the screen. Because our grid is stored in a list and it has no concept of where one row ends and the next row starts, we have to sort of code around that. So we need to modify the getTileOut block to return a tile shape of the empty value if we are getting a tile off screen. So we can check if the absolute value of x is greater than 240. And this would be great. And this does work if our tiles align correctly to our screen. However, if they do not, this will not quite work. So you could use this. It's a bit simpler, but I'm going to do slightly more complicated method. So I want a greater than equal, so I'm going to use not less than because those two are equal. Not less than means greater or equal. Now I'll put my abs of x in here, and then I'm going to divide x by tile size. And then I'll check if it's less than half the grid width. So I'm sort of converting this to tile x. So it's not too complicated. I'll just stick this in here, and if this is true, we'll set tile shape to the empty value. And then we do the same for y, replacing x with y and grid width with grid height. Now let's try to walk off screen. And look at that, except we get stuck. Our x is exactly 240, and we're not colliding with the tile anymore, but what's happening is sprite fencing. Scratch doesn't allow sprites to go fully off screen. We can fix this by switching costume to off-screen fix. It's big, it allows the sprite to go further off screen. So I'll switch costume to off-screen fix at the beginning of move player, and then the animate player will fix all that. So we still display normal costume, but we can walk fully off screen into our new room. And yes, and we'll check that this is correctly our default room we created. If you see a white screen, that probably means you have an issue with your default room. Maybe you aren't adding it to Room Store, or maybe you didn't create it, or maybe or something like that. Okay, let's open the editor, and I'm going to draw something random, something I don't care about here. I'm going to move to the left, and you see we load correctly. I move back to the right, and it's gone. What happened? Well, what happened is that what we created did not get saved. So in save, when we load our room, I want to say if we're in the editor, that is, editor is greater than 0, then before we do anything else, we will broadcast and wait, save room. Okay, now it should save before we load our new room. So I'll draw something random again, move left, move right, and it is still there. Huzzah! Great. I'll just quickly test out up and down. Actually, I'm going to leave this here. Test out up and down, up, then down. We go back into this room. Down works. Let's test out left. Seems to work fine. Let's go up, and then we should be back in our starting room. Yeah, there we go. Let's just add a wall there, so, you know, we don't walk in there. Alright, great. We have a working room loading system, and we can go as far as we want because of the way the rooms list works. This is a little bit boring without any enemies yet, So maybe we'll add enemies next episode. Tell me if you would like that, or if you would rather see something like procedural generation first. I don't know. That'd be kind of fun. But also, it'd be kind of boring without any enemies to spruce up the world. Of course, I'll get to both of them, definitely. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your day, and goodbye.